Inside of this box is the PlayStation Vita, the last fully standalone handheld console that Sony ever made. When it was released in 2011, it actually showed some promise. But throughout its generation, things didn't exactly go as planned. In fact, you can make the argument that, especially here in the West, Sony pretty much left it for dead. However, now in 2026, nearly 15 years after launch, I think that it's not only worth a revisit for the sake of nostalgia, but it might even be something that you'll want to pick up for yourself to game with on the regular. So in this video, we're going to be going over some of the brief history behind the Vita, namely where it succeeded, why it ultimately flopped. Also, especially as someone that's more or less owned one since the beginning, I'm very excited to unbox this bright orange PS Vita 2000 that I imported from Japan to relive that 2010s unboxing experience. Plus, on top of that, we'll also be checking out what the modding scene is like, which I hear at the moment is thriving. So with that, let's get right into it. This portion of today's video is brought to you by Monarch. I've got more financial apps than I'd like to admit. Between banking, credit cards, things can get unwieldy fast, which is why I use Monarch. Monarch gives you one unified dashboard for everything: your accounts, spending, net worth, and recurring bills, meaning there's less hopping around to check on your money. Plus, it's genuinely helpful for setting actual goals and timelines for your finances. Even if you just want to save up for that well-deserved vacation, Monarch lets you easily visualize your progress, which goes a long way to making it happen. Most importantly, Monarch is private, ad-free, they explicitly don't sell your data to brokers, and properly syncs with over 13,000 financial institutions. Not to mention, the experience on both web and mobile is genuinely clean. If you would like to try out Monarch for yourself, click the link in the description below or scan the QR code on your screen and use code Denki50 for 50% off your first year of Monarch Core. Huge thanks to them for sponsoring this portion of the video and supporting the work here we do on Denki. And now, back to our video. To understand the story of the PlayStation Vita, it is important to look at what came prior, which of course was the PSP, Sony's first attempt at a handheld console, and in many ways was ahead of its time. It offered close to home console graphics, a big widescreen display, the ability to play back movies and music on the go, and even had Wi-Fi along with a proper web browser. The PSP for the mid-2000s was truly a jack-of-all-trades device, which really complemented the PS2 and PS3 and Sony's gaming ecosystem to rather good success, moving over 80 million units worldwide in sales. In fact, I made a whole retrospective video on the PSP a couple of years ago, which is one of the most popular videos on the channel. So if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend checking it out after this one, and also subscribe to the channel if you like running it back on old gaming hardware like this. Needless to say, the PSP truly gave Sony real credibility in the handheld gaming space, and thus, when its successor, the PlayStation Vita, was ultimately announced, there was of course a lot of anticipation in the air, but also expectations were running high. When it ultimately launched in December of 2011 in Japan, there was a lot to love. For one, the design felt like a natural evolution of the PSP, keeping a similarly thin profile along with some ergonomic upgrades, such as having two proper analog sticks instead of the singular nub that we had on the PSP. Also, the face buttons, albeit smaller in diameter, at least to me, felt more tactile. Not to mention, the back included these sort of grooves where you could actually put your fingers on to grip, which was necessary because this actually had a full capacitive touchpad on the back. However, perhaps the biggest showstopper for me had to be its screen. Likely benefiting from the influx of large smartphones that were coming out at the time, Sony opted to fit this thing with a beautiful 5-inch HD OLED display. Not only was it touch sensitive, but it visually produced incredible contrast and color that made games look stunning. I remember picking up my PS Vita 1000 in college and being absolutely floored by how beautiful games look, especially when they had vibrant color palettes. Really, the PS Vita was a lot of fun, at least until it started collecting dust. Okay, so what exactly went wrong with the Vita? For starters, there was the price, because it really snowballs from here. Sony ended up releasing a couple of models over its lifetime, but at launch, it offered a Wi-Fi model that started at $249, as well as a model with 3G and GPS connectivity for $300, which on paper actually seemed kind of fine. From a tech enthusiast standpoint, again, you were getting an OLED display, as well as a leap in graphics performance that could justify it. It was honestly a lot of hardware for the money. However, when it came to actually weigh it against the competition, namely the 3DS, and the Vita absolutely had to be on its A game from the get-go. You see, Nintendo might have launched at the same base price of $249, but given that the 3DS actually had a few months head start compared to the Vita for Nintendo to actually gauge consumer feedback, the company actually ended up slashing the cost of the 3DS to $169 in the August prior to the Vita's launch in order to boost slowing sales. This in turn meant that Sony were forced to now justify an $80 premium to potential customers, and they haven't even left the gate yet. And while you can make the argument that PlayStation gamers might not necessarily care about IP such as Pokemon, Mario, or Zelda, at least from the perspective of a more casual gamer, arguably the majority out there, the actual value proposition of stacking strong, exclusive, flagship IPs heavily favored the 3DS compared to the Vita in the long term. Now, when the PS Vita launched, the titles were not bad per se, but there wasn't exactly a lot of standout ones that would incentivize anyone to run out to their local GameStop to buy a whole new console. Thankfully, at least some great games would come out for the Vita. We're talking exclusive IP like Uncharted and Little Big Planet making their way to the console. However, even despite that, especially for me, the appeal for this console started to dry out just halfway into its generation, which ultimately entangled it in this vicious cycle. That's a lack of variety in games, means less incentive for someone to own the console, and a weak consumer base means publishers had even less desire to make games for it. It was bad. Though I will add a slight asterisk, this is specifically talking about the PS Vita in the West. According to some estimates, anywhere between a third to nearly half of the PS Vita sold, we're talking 15 to 16 million units worldwide, that majority actually came from Japan. After all, Sony had naturally built some homegrown brand loyalty for decades. There was where the Vita was actually able to continue where the PSP left off, effectively serving as a thriving platform for visual novels and RPGs. However, even despite that fact, and that some of Japan's most popular Vita games would trickle down to the West, these would ultimately launch to super niche audiences that in the grand scheme of things wouldn't really move the needle all that much. Which meant that to a lot of people, myself included as an owner, perceptually, the Vita began to age quickly, with Sony's own first-party support here fading, and my own unit essentially becoming a very stylish paperweight collecting dust. Okay, but the issues don't stop there. Adding insult to injury, the actual cost of ownership for the PS Vita was abnormally high, thanks in part to PTSD. You see, when Sony were planning their next-gen handheld, you can tell that they were particularly scarred by how rampant piracy was on the PSP. This was even despite their best efforts by going with UMD, their proprietary disc format used exclusively to play games and movies on the PSP. Hackers would still find creative ways to exploit the system. And thus, for the PlayStation Vita, Sony doubled down and made sure to lock every single cranny of it. For example, the battery, which was easily user replaceable on the PSP, now required a mild teardown on the Vita, which to be fair, was likely because people were literally exploiting the batteries to jailbreak the OS, so that one kind of makes sense. Also, there was the memory card situation, where the PSP utilized Sony's somewhat popular memory stick duo format for storing data, which was also commonly used in their digital cameras and camcorders at the time. For the PS Vita specifically, Sony decided to go with a proprietary memory card that could only be used with that console. These cards were astronomically expensive, but generally speaking, they were around as high as $125 for 32. Let me tell you, even for 2012 standards, this was pretty insane. I mean, for God's sakes, extra storage was crucial, especially if you were remotely interested in downloading games on this thing. When it came to the concerns of piracy, Sony very clearly overcorrected and nerfed any potential of the PS Vita becoming a handheld multimedia powerhouse. And probably the worst part of all of this was that it was pretty pointless, because it didn't take long for the Vita to get hacked anyway. In fact, I'll be showing you why you'd actually want to do that later on in this video. However, before we get there, let's take a look at our guinea pig. This is a new to me PS Vita 2000 in neon orange. I am so excited to get this out of the box. At least going off the exterior, this appears to be pretty well kept. Also, it was bought on January 15th, 2017, which was a whole 2 years before the Vita was discontinued. Taking a look inside the box, we have a bunch of things, including our power situation, which also has USB on one end, and on the other, that's not right. I think the person that sold me this sent me the wrong power stuff, which I'll show you why I know that in a second. Boom! Wow, that is bright. Holy shit. Something else I'm really liking here are the translucent buttons, revealing the body color underneath. It makes for a very slick look, especially here in our studio lighting, where you get some nice refractions. Now, bringing in my original PS Vita 1000, as you can see, while there are some similarities here, there are a ton of differences as well. For one, we have a more pronounced screen bezel. Also, the PS Vita 2000 is definitely lighter than the 1000, and looking at it from the profile, the 2000 is also thinner as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, outside of my honeymoon period, I played my PS Vita 1000 quite infrequently, which meant that when the 2000 was announced, I didn't have much incentive to buy this thing, though if I did have one reason to pull the trigger, it would be this right here, where the PS Vita 1000 again charged with a proprietary cable. This one actually did with micro USB, though that is what this is for, the charger that was included with our neon orange PS Vita 2000. The guy gave us a charger for the original PS Vita. And here we are, the touchscreen. So the PS Vita had a rather unique looking interface that combined the aesthetics of PlayStation along with the sensibilities of a smartphone. So not only could I navigate here with my D-pad pretty easily, but also with the touchscreen you could use your finger, and the touch points on here with these big bubble icons meant that everything was easy to hit. However, on the other hand, something that still frustrates me with Vita OS to this day has to be that a bunch of things just take more button presses than they should. For example, let's open up settings here. As you can see, it opens up like its own individual app. I mean, it might not be the worst thing in the world, but this is a stark contrast to how the XMB was set up on the PSP and PS3. And while I haven't gotten my games reset up on these yet, just to compare the screens on a surface level, because the PS Vita 2000 has an LCD compared to this awesome OLED on the 1000. I think that the LCD, while not as bright or saturated a display, actually yields more accurate color overall. This OLED is very punchy. By comparison, the LCD on this PS Vita 2000, while it doesn't have the same level of contrast as the OLED, for some people might actually yield better color in how more natural it looks. And perhaps more importantly, a consideration, especially if you plan on using the Vita a lot, the LCD is certainly less prone to the effects of burn-in than the OLED. But yeah, let me get this guy all set up to get reacquainted with the gaming experience and see what the modding scene is like for it in 2026. Now, with the benefit of 15 years since launch, we've seen folks do some pretty fun hardware mods to their Vitas, from simple things like refreshing the outer shell and buttons, to battery swaps, even USB-C charging and LED accent lighting. However, since my 2000 series Vita is pretty clean already, the only thing I'm looking to add hardware-wise is a PS Vita game card to micro SD adapter. As you can probably guess, this is an affordable way for us to expand our console storage capacity to hold lots and lots of games. I actually bought this kit off Amazon, which includes a 128 gig card, which is plenty for what I need. But in order for our Vita to actually recognize it, we do need to jailbreak the OS. Now, honestly, I do feel like most people interested in modding on this platform would probably do this anyways, but more importantly, it's just stupid easy to do regardless. The process is more or less the same across all Vita models. 1000 series owners are required to have an official Vita memory card of some sort installed on the bottom of their device, since those consoles did not have dedicated storage partitions for auxiliary data. However, if you were like me and have a 2000 series console and or a Vita/PlayStation TV box, these devices have 1 gigabyte of internal memory on board, which is plenty suffice for jailbreaking without the need of extra hardware. Now, I will be linking all of the wikis and tutorials that I use to set up my Vita in the description below, but basically this is using the Henlo exploit. First, I connected my Vita to local Wi-Fi, then used that to update my Vita to the most recent firmware, which was 3.74. Then, using the console's built-in web browser, I went to this URL, hit a button that said unlock my Vita, which installed a couple of things to my device, and just like that, the exploit was complete. At least kinda, because I had to do one extra step to ensure that the jailbreak would stay on the console every time it would restart, and that's using something called Enso. This essentially runs a utility that patches and installs custom firmware onto the Vita in order to lock it down proper. But yeah, in just like 30 minutes or so, our Vita was fully hacked, which allows us to do a whole lot. Now, personally for me, the first order of business was using Vita Deploy to format my micro SD card so that the console would be able to recognize my expanded storage. And while Vita Deploy was open, I also got myself Vita DB Downloader. This is a database that's essentially a gateway to a slew of apps and plugins that make the quality of life on your Vita so much better. One such addition is a file manager called Vita Shell. And trust me, this will be your best friend throughout the modding process, since most homebrew guides out there pretty much default to it. Not only is it great for moving, copying, and deleting apps on your system, but it will also let you access your Vita's storage via your computer over FTP or USB. Which, as you can imagine, is really important, especially if you plan on sourcing your own Vita games online and want to move them to the console itself. Something else worthwhile to install on your Vita, especially if you love the PSP, is Adrenaline. Basically, this homebrew takes the official PSP emulator for the Vita and gives you a full virtual environment, XMB and all, which of course allows you to play your PSP games. Which not only is pretty neat because the hardware here is way more powerful, but also with the Vita, you have the benefit of a larger, higher quality display. And personally for me, I just like the size and the more tactile buttons of the Vita compared to its predecessor. But that's not all. Apart from your PSP and Vita games, I've been finding out that the custom porting scene on this platform is crazy. There are people out there dedicated to bringing unofficial but highly tailored ports of a ton of things, from Android games like the mobile release of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, to PC titles like Cuphead, and even GameCube games like Animal Crossing that have no right feeling this native on the Vita, but here we are. Keep in mind, there is a bit of work that you'll have to do to get these set up, and of course, you will have to source the game files on your own, because obviously they're not going to make pirating that easy, or all of this would get shut down pretty fast. With all this being said, in general, there's just a lot of games that you can play on the Vita, and more gets added every single day by the community, which is cool. Now, regardless of what games you decide to play on your Vita, there are a slew of helpful overclocking tools that you can find to eke out better frame rates, as well as overlays to monitor your system performance. You will, of course, have to experiment between games to see what will actually work, since in my experience, I've run into maybe a CPU or GPU crash from time to time. But I will say, when you find it, it absolutely hits, especially if you are on a nostalgia kick like I am, playing a game like Tearaway. Actually, I was gonna play Persona 4 Golden, but they announced Revival like last week, so I'll have to wait. Oh, and of course, after you get all of your games on there, you absolutely got to go crazy customizing your home screen to make it your own, either with custom launchers that fully change the look of the OS, or if you just want to keep it simple, there's Custom Theme Manager to help you find and install ones to your liking. Personally, for me, I just like the clean look of the stock PS Vita background, but at least I personalize my lock screen with a wallpaper. But anywho, even just on my first day modding my Vita, truth be told, I am just barely scratching the surface on what's possible with this platform, which is insanely cool to think about the potential of it all. And if you've hacked your Vita, let me know some of the cool stuff that you found in the comments below, as it might help some of your fellow viewers out. But otherwise, thanks for watching this video on Denki channel.